Saturday, the 9th of May, 2026. Lucas Oil Stadium, Indianapolis. Caitlin Clark steps onto the floor in a league already under pressure from its own rising expectations.
By Iowa. We saw this a lot in the Sweet 16 game against Colorado. Caitlin Clark turning the corner.
And from the growing conversation around Angel Reese and a new generation of stars changing the WNBA in real time. But what happens next isn't just another game moment. It's a statistical rupture in history. A milestone no one in 29 years of professional women's basketball reached faster, and a night that instantly shifts the conversation from what she is to how far this is going to go. The season of doubt. To understand what May 9th meant, you have to go back to the offseason. You cannot appreciate where Clark is right now without understanding the specific environment she was walking back into. The 2025 season was difficult, and I think her genuine supporters owe it to her to acknowledge that rather than pretend it away. Injuries disrupted her rhythm at the worst possible times. There were stretches where the Fever looked like a team still figuring out how to build a winning structure around their star. And when you are carrying the weight of being called the face of an entire league, inconsistency gets amplified in ways it simply does not for players with smaller profiles. The angle that emerged was one I heard more times than I can count. She peaked in year one. The argument went that the 2024 magic was real, but deceptive rookie seasons can hide beneath the element of surprise. And when defenses adjust, players either adapt or decline. The 2025 numbers were the adjustment, the evidence, the decline. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. When I heard that argument laid out properly, not as a hot take, but as an actual analytical case, I made myself engage with it rather than dismiss it. And I understood why it had legs, even though I disagreed with the conclusion. The numbers gave it surface credibility. The team results gave it narrative support. For a while, it felt like a real conversation. What I could never accept was the idea that a 23-year-old player who had just restructured the commercial landscape of her professional league was somehow already finished growing. That is not how elite athletes work. The players who matter most are not the ones who peak immediately. They are the ones who keep finding another level every time critics think they have found the ceiling. Then there was the comparison narrative. All off-season, the framing kept circling back to the binary Clark or Reese. The implication, sometimes explicit and sometimes buried in subtext, was that the perceived gap between them was never real, that the league had chosen its favorite and dressed it up as objectivity. And on top of all of that, January brought the salary numbers.
It's a new salary cap that starts at $7 million. That's up from $1.5 million just last year.
Clark at $527,155. Reese at $349,571. A gap of nearly $178,000. The reaction was immediate and loud on every corner of basketball social media, with critics adding it to their already running list of grievances. Through every bit of it, the injury season, the off-season takes, the comparison narrative, the salary headlines, Clark said almost nothing public. No clapbacks, no pointed interviews, no frustration vented through proxies. She went back to work. She came into 2026 and let the floor be the only answer that mattered. There is a rarer kind of competitor whose focus is so completely internal, so completely oriented toward the game itself, that outside noise genuinely cannot reach them. Clark has always been that kind. Even at Iowa, she never seemed to be performing for the critics. She was performing for the game. That quality, that quiet, stubborn focus on what she can control is exactly what makes May 9th feel like such a total, complete, and devastating statement. She did not silence the doubters by arguing with them. She silenced them by doing something nobody in the history of her league had done faster. The record that rewrote history in 54 games. Let's get into the numbers, because this is where the real story lives, and the real story is bigger than most people have stopped to fully appreciate. 1,000 points, 250 rebounds, 250 assists, 54 games. The WNBA has been played professionally since 1997, 29 years. In that time, the league has produced some of the most decorated athletes in the history of team sports. Diana Taurasi, the all-time WNBA scoring leader, a 5-time champion, A player so dominant for so long that they literally call her the White Mamba. Sue Bird, 4 Olympic gold medals, 5 WNBA titles, a player who redefined what a point guard could be at the professional level for 2 decades. Breanna Stewart, 2-time WNBA champion, 2-time Finals MVP, widely regarded as the most complete forward this league has ever seen. Candace Parker, Maya Moore, who was so good she walked away from the game at the peak of her powers and came back and still looked like herself. These are the names. These are the careers. None of them reached the combined 1,250 threshold faster than Caitlin Clark just did. Read that one more time. Not one of the greatest players in the history of this league got there faster. Clark did it in 54 games across parts of 3 seasons, including a 2025 chapter that was supposed to be the evidence that her ceiling had already been reached.
She finished with a career high 35 points as the Fever go on to win 110-109, and
she did it anyway, faster than everyone. Here is why this particular milestone matters beyond the headline number. It is not a scorer's milestone. It is not a playmaker's milestone. It is not a rebounder's milestone. It is all 3 simultaneously, which makes it a complete player milestone, a statement about the totality of what Clark brings to the floor every time she steps on it. Think about what each number actually requires. The 1,000 points means you are producing offensively at an elite rate, consistently, across dozens of different game plans and defensive schemes and physical matchups. The 250 assists means you are making your teammates better at an elite rate, reading the floor, creating angles, generating open looks for players who might never have found them otherwise. The 250 rebounds from the guard position, that is the one people overlook. Guards are not supposed to rebound at that pace. It requires effort, positioning, physicality, and a willingness to do the unglamorous work that never shows up in the highlight reel. Clark does all 3. At the same time, faster than anyone. On the night the record fell, May 9th against the Dallas Wings, she put up 20 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds. Not a vintage explosion. A clean, controlled professional basketball game from a player who no longer needs a signature performance to make history. She gave her team what it needed, made the right decisions throughout, and still ended up rewriting the record books. That version of Caitlin Clark, the one who does not need 35 points to define a night, is actually more dangerous than the one who went for 40 at Iowa. The Fever lost that game. Some people will reach for that as an asterisk. Do not let them get away with it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scored his 38,387 career points on plenty of losing nights. Bill Russell won 11 championships and still had games where his team came up short. Individual milestones exist completely independently of single-game team results. History does not check the final score before it records something. What strikes me most watching her in 2026 is the settledness. Faster defensive reads, smarter decisions in late clock situations, a physical edge that was not always consistent in 2024. This is a player who absorbed the lessons of a difficult 2025, did the work nobody saw, and came back measurably more complete on every part of the floor. She is 22 years old. The player who just set the fastest 1,250 pace in WNBA history
are just some of the ways she puts on a clinic night after night, and she's piling up assists faster than any player in WNBA history.
Is still, by every reasonable measure, getting better. That is a terrifying sentence for everyone else in this league. Angel Reese's own story. This is where I want to slow down and be genuinely fair. Because the easy thing, the traffic-generating thing, would be to use this section to contrast Clark's momentum with some version of Reese struggling. To let the rivalry narrative do the emotional work for us. That is not what this channel is about. And honestly, beyond the ethics of it, the real picture is far more interesting anyway. Angel Reese is a 2-time WNBA All-Star. Let that land, not 1, 2. She was selected in 2024 and again in 2025, which means even through the season that critics were using to question Clark, Reese was doing enough on the court to earn recognition from the league itself. She is 22 years old, one of the most physically dominant presences in the post, elite on the offensive glass in a way that causes genuine structural problems for opposing front courts, and at precisely the age when players with real ability typically make their biggest leap. This offseason brought one of the most significant moments of her young professional career. The Chicago Sky traded her to the Atlanta Dream. New city, new organization, new coaching staff, entirely new cast of teammates. That is a wholesale reset, and in professional sports, wholesale resets are not always clean. The history of this league is full of talented players who struggled when the ground shifted beneath them. Moving is hard. Rebuilding chemistry is hard. Proving yourself all over again in a new market to a new fan base that is genuinely hard. Reese's debut with Atlanta suggested she was built for exactly that kind of challenge. The Dream beat the Minnesota Lynx 91-90, one possession, last-second drama. And the moment that sealed it, a crucial defensive stop in the closing seconds, had Reese's fingerprints on it. Think about what that means. First game in a new uniform, highest pressure moment of the night, and she made the defensive play. Not a highlight reel dunk, not a flashy offensive move in a comfortable blowout. A gritty, professional, team-first defensive stop when everything was on the line. That is the kind of moment that earns a locker room faster than any stat line ever could. Then, there was the Courtney Vandersloot situation. Her former Chicago Sky teammate made comments during the offseason that generated significant headlines and circled Reese's name in ways she probably did not need heading into a fresh start. I am not going to relitigate every detail here. The full story is always more complicated than its loudest version. And frankly, piling onto that narrative would miss the more important point entirely. What matters is how Reese responded. She did not let it derail her. She showed up to Atlanta, locked in, and made that defensive stop in a one-possession game on opening night. That is the answer. That is the character. Two superstars on different paths. That is the actual story, and it is genuinely more compelling than the manufactured rivalry that social media keeps trying to sell us.
Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, they have not been on the same court since March Madness, so there was a lot of hype behind their first professional matchup.
Clark and Reese play different positions, bring different skill sets, and are building their legacies along completely different trajectories. The constant either, or framing the idea that you can only celebrate one by diminishing the other, shrinks both of them into something smaller than they actually are. This league is growing too fast and has too much momentum right now for that kind of zero-sum thinking. Reese's 2026 chapter with Atlanta is still early. The talent is real, the competitive fire is real, and June 4th, the first time she walks into Gainbridge Fieldhouse wearing a Dream uniform, is going to be a genuine basketball event worth every bit of the anticipation building around it. Not a grudge match, not a rivalry collision. Two excellent players competing at the highest level they have ever played at. That is worth getting excited about on its own terms. What the salary gap actually means. Let's talk about money in the WNBA because right now, it's one of the most emotionally charged topics in the entire sport, and almost none of the online debate is actually grounded in how the system works. Here are the 2026 numbers. Caitlin Clark at $527,155. Angel Reese at $349,571. A gap of roughly $177,584. And before this turns into another social media argument, it's important to understand something most people are skipping over. This gap is not random, and it is not subjective. It comes directly from the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement, specifically a performance-based structure called EPIC, the Extraordinary Performance Incentive Contract. EPIC was introduced as part of the league's broader push to modernize salaries and better align pay with impact. Not just reputation, not just draft position, not just media attention, but measurable performance output and league-defined achievement criteria. One of the key entry points into the highest EPIC tier is all WNBA first-team selection. Clark earned that honor. That selection, combined with her statistical production and league-wide performance benchmarks, placed her at the top level of the EPIC structure. That is how the number is built, not negotiated in isolation, not influenced by narrative, but triggered by defined criteria that every team and player union representative agreed to in advance. And this is where reality matters more than reaction. Because if you go back just a few seasons, this is not how WNBA salaries looked at all. In 2022 and 2023, Even franchise players were often earning in the $200,000, $250,000 range. The league has been steadily increasing compensation, but the Clark era has accelerated that conversation into a completely different financial category. The Epic structure itself is a reflection of that shift, a recognition that certain players now operate at a scale that impacts revenue, ratings, and attendance in measurable ways. We already saw that impact in real time. When Clark entered the league in 2024, Indiana Fever home attendance jumped from near-bottom league numbers to sellouts at Gainbridge Fieldhouse almost overnight.
Caitlin Clark fans are packed inside the arena right now as this game continues inside right now.
The team averaged over 17,000, 18,000 fans per game in multiple stretches, including nationally televised matchups that pushed WNBA ratings into record territory on ESPN platforms. That isn't opinion, that's broadcast data, ticket sales, and league reporting. That commercial surge is exactly the type of outcome Epic was designed to recognize. Now compare that to Angel Reese's $349,571 figure. And this is where the conversation often becomes unfair online. That number is not a statement about her talent, it is a reflection of where she currently sits within the specific Epic thresholds. Reese is still early in her professional trajectory, and her value curve is still developing. If her 2026 season produces all WNBA level recognition or equivalent statistical benchmarks, that number is designed to move. The system is literally built to adjust upward based on output. And that is the part most debates ignore. It is not a fixed hierarchy, it is a performance ladder. What makes Epic important is that it attempts to quantify something the league has struggled with for decades: how to financially reward players who don't just perform well, but move the entire ecosystem. TV deals, sponsorship, interest, arena demand, merchandise spikes, these are real economic drivers. And leagues at every level of professional sports eventually build pay structures around them. That is what is happening here. So when people frame this as favoritism or controversy, they are missing the structure entirely. The WNBA and the Players Union negotiated this system together. The criteria were agreed upon collectively. There is no hidden switch being pulled behind the scenes. There is a formula responding to results. And that brings the conversation back to its simplest form. Caitlin Clark is currently at the top of that structure because her performance on the court and in its broader league impact has met the highest defined thresholds available in the system. Angel Reese is on a different point of that same ladder, with the same rules in front of her. And in a league finally entering a new financial era, that distinction is not personal, it is procedural. The game is no longer just producing stars, it is pricing them in real time. What June 4th really represents? Write it down. The 4th of June, 2026. Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Indiana Fever versus the Atlanta Dream. This game has been circled on calendars since the schedule dropped. And the more the 2026 season develops the record on May 9th, Reese's debut stop in Atlanta, the salary conversation, all of it, the more weight keeps attaching itself to that one date. By the time June 4th arrives, it is going to feel less like a regular season game and more like one of those events that defines a moment in a sport's history. The kind you remember exactly where you were watching.
Overnight, Caitlin Clark becoming the all-time leading scorer in women's Division I college basketball, and she did it in style.
Here is why, on every level, that actually matters. This is the first Clark-Reese matchup of 2026. Think about the buildup. An entire offseason of comparison narratives. A salary gap that generated national headlines. Takes flying from every direction on every platform. And all of it, every word, every panel discussion, every podcast argument completely unresolved. Because the only thing that actually resolves it is the game, the basketball, the 40 minutes of real competition on a real floor where everything that gets said in studios and comment sections either gets confirmed or gets exposed. That is what June 4th represents, the resolution no panel can provide. It is also the first time Angel Reese walks into Gainbridge Fieldhouse wearing an Atlanta Dream uniform instead of a Chicago Sky uniform. And that context matters more than people are giving it credit for. When Reese was in Chicago, Indiana was a conference opponent, a rivalry game, competitive but not carrying this kind of personal weight. Now she is coming in as someone who has started a completely new chapter, trying to prove that the Atlanta move was the right decision in one of the most intimidating buildings in the league to walk into as a visiting player. Because here is what Gainbridge Fieldhouse has become under Caitlin Clark. In 2024, the Fever set a single-season WNBA home attendance record, 20,000 fans per game, sellout after sellout. A building that was averaging under 7,000 per game before Clark arrived was suddenly one of the loudest venues in the sport. Visiting players have talked openly about the noise level. Coaches have mentioned it in press conferences. The home court advantage at Gainbridge is not a talking point, it is a documented, measurable reality. Walking in there, in a high-stakes game, in a new chapter of your career, that is a real challenge for any player. What does each player need to prove when the ball tips? For Clark, June 4th is a different kind of test than May 9th. The milestone proves sustained individual excellence across a career arc. This game is about a single night, about what she does against a defense that has had weeks to specifically prepare for her in a late-game situation where the decisions she makes under maximum pressure are what separate good players from defining players. The Fever went 20-20 at home last season. Clark knows better than anyone that records do not win games.
She's back! Points in the quarter, including 3 long-range threes to get Indiana.
Execution does. For Reese, this is the biggest statement opportunity of her Atlanta chapter so far. A strong performance here against this team, in this building, in front of this audience, announces her 2026 narrative louder than any other game on the Dream schedule could. It tells the league that the trade worked, that the reset unlocks something, that she belongs at the center of the biggest moments this sport produces. But here is what I keep coming back to. The basketball decides everything, not the previews, not the social media volume building through the week, not the takes from people who have already written the script before tip-off. The game itself is the only verdict that matters. That is how it should be. That is how Clark has always wanted it. And if May 9th told us anything, it is that when she lets her game do the talking, the words tend to be historic. And maybe the most important thing about May 9th isn't the record itself, it's what it changed. Because once a player moves this fast through history, the timeline around her stops feeling normal. Every game becomes a reference point, every opponent becomes part of the measurement, and every night starts asking a question the league can't avoid anymore. Not just what Caitlin Clark did, but what happens next now that she's already rewritten how fastest ever can be defined. June 4th is coming. New matchup, same pressure, different stakes. So when the ball goes up at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, are we still watching a season in progress or the beginning of something that was inevitable all along?